Bullies slapped the black girl in the hallway. She broke his shoulder before the teacher arrived. The slap echoed through the hallway of Roosevelt High School like thunder, followed by a tense silence that made all the students stop in the middle of their conversations. Tyler Morrison, the popular football player, had just slapped Keisha Williams hard enough to turn her head. "Stay in your place, girl," Tyler growled, surrounded by his 3 friends who laughed at the situation. "Nobody told you to bump into me." Keisha was 17 and already used to being invisible in the hallways of that Atlanta school. A scholarship student from a poor neighborhood, she kept her head down and her grades high, avoiding trouble at all costs. Her second-hand uniform and worn backpack contrasted with the other students' designer sneakers. What Tyler didn't expect was the reaction that followed. Keisha touched the spot on her face where his red handprint still stung, her dark eyes meeting his with a disturbing calm. "You shouldn't have done that," she said, her voice low but firm. Tyler laughed, showing off to his friends. "What are you going to do? Cry to the principal?" He raised his hand again, preparing for another, even harder slap. That's when everything changed. In one fluid, impossible-to-follow motion, Keisha grabbed Tyler's wrist, spun his body around, and applied a lever that made his shoulder pop with a sickening sound. Tyler screamed in pain, falling to his knees on the cold hallway floor, his right arm hanging at an unnatural angle. "My shoulder! She broke my shoulder!" Tyler yelled, tears streaming down his face as his friends backed away, too shocked to react. The students who witnessed the scene were paralyzed. The quiet, shy girl no one noticed had just neutralized the most feared bully in school in less than 3 seconds, using a technique that looked like something out of an action movie. Keisha stepped back, adjusting her backpack on her shoulder as if nothing had happened. Her eyes scanned the crowd of shocked faces before settling on Tyler's friends, who now looked much less brave. "Anyone else want to try?" she asked, her voice still eerily calm. The hallway was completely silent except for Tyler's moans of pain on the floor. No one moved, no one spoke. It was as if everyone was trying to process what they had just witnessed. Keisha began walking toward her next class, stepping over Tyler as if he were just an obstacle in her way. But as she walked away, one question echoed in the minds of everyone present. Who was Keisha Williams, really? Because one thing was certain. No one learns how to break a shoulder like that by watching YouTube videos. And the way she had moved, the technical precision, the coolness under pressure, all pointed to years of intensive training. What no one knew was that behind that shy student facade lay a story that perfectly explained that devastating display of controlled strength. If you're curious to find out how a seemingly defenseless girl managed to neutralize a 220-pound bully with such ease, be sure to subscribe to the channel, because what you're about to discover about Keisha's past will leave you speechless. Principal Peterson rushed into the hallway 3 minutes later, finding Tyler still on the floor, surrounded by paramedics who had been called by a teacher. His shoulder was visibly dislocated, and moans of pain echoed through the hallways now crowded with curious students trying to film the scene with their cell phones. "Where's the girl who did this?" Peterson asked, searching for Keisha in the crowd. But she had simply disappeared, as if she had never been there. Jake Morrison, Tyler's cousin and equally popular at school, was furious. "That crazy girl broke my cousin's shoulder," he shouted to anyone who would listen. "She's dangerous. She should be arrested." On the school's social media, videos of the incident already had thousands of views. The comments were divided between those who called Keisha a hero for finally putting Tyler in his place, and others who labeled her violent and unstable. But one thing was unanimous. No one could explain how a 120-pound girl had neutralized a 220-pound football player so easily. Keisha, meanwhile, was in the library, pretending to study math while trying to process what had happened. Her hands were shaking slightly, not from fear, but from adrenaline. It had been 3 years since she had needed to use her skills like that, and the familiar feeling of being in survival mode made her uneasy. The truth was that Keisha Williams wasn't just a 17-year-old scholarship student. She was a survivor. At 14, she and her mother had fled Detroit after her stepfather, a violent drug dealer named Rico, discovered that her mother was cooperating with the police. They had 20 minutes to grab what they could carry before disappearing forever. For 2 years, they lived in shelters and cheap apartments, always looking over their shoulders, always ready to run again. It was in one of those shelters that Keisha met retired Sergeant Jennifer Cruz, an Afghanistan veteran who volunteered to teach self-defense to vulnerable women. Jennifer saw something in Keisha, a fierce determination masked by shyness, and began training her not only in combat techniques, but in emotional control and survival strategy. Strength doesn't come from muscles, it comes from the mind, Jennifer used to say during intensive training sessions. And anyone who underestimates a quiet girl always pays the price. For 2 years, Keisha trained 5 hours a day, Krav Maga, Jiu-Jitsu, boxing, and disarming techniques. But more importantly, Jennifer taught her how to read people, identify threats, and never show her cards until the exact moment she was ready to play them. When they finally settled in Atlanta, Keisha had become a human weapon disguised as a shy teenager. The scholarship to Roosevelt High was her chance at a normal life, away from violence and fear. She had promised her mother she would keep her head down, not draw attention to herself, try to be just a regular student. But Tyler Morrison had broken that promise for her. At lunchtime, Jake Morrison and his 2 friends, Brett and Connor, intercepted Keisha in the hallway near the lockers. They had spent the entire morning planning how to put the girl in her place, and they were confident that 3 against 1 would be enough to intimidate her. "Hey, psycho," Jake growled, blocking her path. "You think you can hurt my cousin and walk around like nothing happened?" Keisha stopped, her hands relaxed at her sides, her eyes quickly assessing the positions of the 3 boys. Exit left, blocked by Brett. Exit right, blocked by Connor. Behind her, a wall of lockers. Ahead, Jake, who was clearly trying to imitate his cousin's intimidating stance. "Tyler hit me first," she replied calmly. "I was just defending myself." "You broke his arm." Brett shouted, closing in. "That's not defense, that's assault." What they didn't know was that every second they spent talking gave Keisha more time to analyze their weaknesses. Jake favored his left side, probably from an old knee injury. Brett was nervous, sweating, his hands shaking slightly. He didn't really want to be there. Connor was the most dangerous, relaxed, and confident, but he kept his weight poorly distributed. "You have 5 seconds to get out of my face," Keisha said, her voice low but laden with an authority that made Connor take an involuntary step back. Jake laughed, but it was a forced laugh. "Or what? You're going to break our arms too? 3 against 1, kitten. You're not that tough." That's when Keisha smiled. It wasn't a friendly or nervous smile. It was the cold, calculated smile of someone who had faced men far more dangerous than 3 spoiled middle-class teenagers. "You're right," she said, adjusting her backpack on her shoulder. 3 against 1 isn't fair." Jake smiled, thinking she was giving in. "For you," Keisha added. The hallway was starting to fill up again with curious students. Cell phones appeared, cameras were turned on. Everyone wanted to see if the girl who had broken Tyler Morrison's shoulder would do it again. But this time, Keisha did something different. Instead of waiting for the first move, she simply walked toward Jake, stopped a few inches from him, and whispered something in his ear that made his face go completely pale. No one heard what she said, but Jake immediately backed away, pulling Brett and Connor with him. "Let it go," he muttered, avoiding Keisha's gaze. "It's not worth it." The 3 of them quickly walked away, leaving Keisha alone in the hallway, surrounded by confused students who didn't understand why the confrontation had ended so abruptly. What she had whispered were just 7 words: "I know where you live, and you don't." It was a lie, of course. But it was the kind of lie that worked because it was said by someone who clearly knew how to make it true if necessary. And Jake Morrison, arrogant as he was smart enough to recognize a real threat when he heard one. As she walked to her next class, Keisha felt the weight of curious glances and whispers around her. Some students greeted her with respectful nods, others moved away in fear. But they all had the same question: Who was this quiet girl who had shown up at the school 2 years ago and was now terrorizing the most notorious bullies at Roosevelt High? The answer to that question was buried in social service files, police reports, and memories Keisha would rather not revisit. But as she had learned from Jennifer Cruz, sometimes the past must be faced so the future can be protected. And something told her that Tyler Morrison and his friends weren't going to give up so easily. They had underestimated the shy girl once and paid the price. But arrogance and privilege have a way of blinding people to the obvious. What they didn't know was that every attempt at intimidation only strengthened Keisha's determination to show them that some people can't be broken, no matter how many times they try to bend them. The next morning, Keisha arrived at school to find her picture plastered on flyers scattered throughout the hallways. Warning, violent student was written in large letters, with a blurred photo of her walking down the hallway. Below was a dramatic caption, "Keisha Williams is a real danger to our school community. We demand immediate action from the administration." Jake Morrison and his friends had spent the night crafting a smear campaign, convinced they could use social pressure to force Keisha out of school. They completely underestimated who they were dealing with. Mrs. Rodriguez, the history teacher who always paid attention to details others overlooked, watched Keisha walk down the hallways with her usual disturbing calm. While other students whispered and pointed, Keisha simply picked up one of the flyers, folded it carefully, and tucked it into her backpack. "Interesting psychological warfare strategy," Mrs. Rodriguez commented as Keisha entered her classroom. "But something tells me you've faced worse tactics than that." It was the first time in 2 years that a teacher had spoken directly to Keisha about her situation. Mrs. Rodriguez had served as a war correspondent in Iraq before becoming an educator, and she recognized the signs of someone trained to survive in hostile environments. "They're trying to isolate me," Keisha replied, surprising her teacher with her cold analysis of the situation. "Creating a narrative that I'm dangerous to justify what they've done." Mrs. Rodriguez closed the classroom door and sat down at the desk next to Keisha. "You know this isn't going to stop here, right? Tyler Morrison comes from an influential family. His father owns the largest car dealership in town and finances half the school's sporting events." "I know exactly who the Morrisons are," Keisha said, and something in her tone made Mrs. Rodriguez lean forward, curious. During lunch, Jake Morrison put the second phase of his plan into action. He had convinced 15 students to sign a petition demanding Keisha's expulsion, and he was filming dramatic videos on TikTok about how the school was failing to protect students from violent elements. "This girl is clearly unstable," Jake declared to the camera, flanked by Brett and Connor. "My cousin is in the hospital because of her. How many more have to get hurt before the administration takes action?" The video went viral within 2 hours, reaching parents, alumni, and townspeople. The comments were divided between support for the victim Tyler and criticism of the permissive education system. Jake smiled, convinced he had found the perfect formula to destroy Keisha socially. Meanwhile, Keisha was in the library with Mrs. Rodriguez, who had brought her personal laptop. "You said you know the Morrison family. Care to elaborate?" Keisha hesitated for a moment, then made a decision that would change the entire game. "Rico Martinez, my ex-stepfather, used to sell drugs to high-class clients. Tyler Morrison Sr. was one of his best customers." Mrs. Rodriguez blinked, processing the information. "Do you have any proof of this?" Rico was paranoid. He recorded every transaction as life insurance. "When my mom cooperated with the police, she copied all the files before we fled." Keisha pulled a small flash drive from her backpack. 3 years of sales. Names, dates, amounts, even photos of some deliveries. The teacher stared at the flash drive as if it were a nuclear bomb. "Keisha, do you understand what this means?" "It means that while Jake is playing psychological warfare in the school hallways, I have real ammunition for a war he doesn't even know exists." That afternoon, Tyler Morrison Sr. showed up at the school for an emergency meeting with Principal Peterson. His son had spent the morning crying in the hospital, not just from physical pain, but from humiliation. The story was spreading on social media, and Tyler Sr. couldn't allow his family's reputation to be tarnished by some delinquent. "I want this girl expelled today," he demanded, slamming his fist on the principal's desk. "My lawyer is already preparing an assault lawsuit. We will sue the school as well if you don't take action." Principal Peterson, a 50-year-old man who had spent 30 years avoiding conflict with influential families, nodded nervously. "Let's schedule a disciplinary hearing for tomorrow, given the seriousness of the case." "There is no seriousness," Mrs. Rodriguez interrupted, entering the room uninvited. "There is only a bully who finally found someone who won't accept being assaulted." Tyler Sr. turned, furious. "And who are you two?" "I'm the teacher who will testify that Tyler Morrison assaulted Keisha Williams without provocation. And I'm the person who has a keen interest in getting to know your family better, Mr. Morrison." There was something in Mrs. Rodriguez's tone that made Tyler Sr. back away slightly. He couldn't explain why, but that teacher was looking at him as if she knew some dangerous secret. That night, while Jake Morrison celebrated Tyler's father's reunion with champagne stolen from a family cellar, posting stories about justice being served, Keisha was at home with her mother, finally telling her the whole truth about what had happened at school. "Honey," her mother said, holding her hands, "you know that using this information about Rico could put us in danger again." "I know, Mom. But I also know that some battles can't be avoided. They chose to make me their enemy. Now they're going to find out what kind of enemy I can be." Mrs. Rodriguez had spent the night researching the Morrison family online, connecting dots that were beginning to form a very interesting pattern. Tyler Sr. had a lifestyle far beyond what a car dealership could support, and there were old rumors about questionable investments. For a moment, when Jake posted another video declaring premature victory over the violent girl who was finally going to be punished, everyone thought they were witnessing just another injustice of the system protecting the privileged. But those who know true strength know that it grows in silence, and sometimes apparent defeat is just the perfect position for a devastating attack that will rewrite the rules of the game. On the morning of the disciplinary hearing, the Roosevelt High Auditorium was packed. Tyler Sr. had called on the local media, turning what should have been an internal process into a public spectacle to expose violence in schools. Jake Morrison was broadcasting live on Instagram, confident that he would finally see Keisha expelled on national television. "Today you're going to see justice served," Jake declared to his followers, filming the entrance filled with reporters. "This dangerous girl is finally going to pay for what she did." Keisha entered silently from the back of the auditorium, accompanied only by her mother and Mrs. Rodriguez. While Jake mocked her on social media, calling her a coward who couldn't even get a lawyer, Keisha simply sat in the front row, the small flash drive tucked discreetly into the palm of her hand. Principal Peterson nervously opened the session. "We are here to evaluate the incident involving student Keisha Williams and Tyler Morrison, which resulted in serious bodily injury." "Serious bodily injury is an understatement," interrupted Tyler Sr., rising dramatically. "My son is traumatized. That delinquent broke his shoulder for no reason." The murmurs of support echoed through the crowded audience of upper-class parents that Tyler Sr. had mobilized. Cell phones recorded every word, and Jake smiled maliciously, certain he was witnessing Keisha's public destruction. "Mr. Morrison," Mrs. Rodriguez said, rising calmly, "before we proceed with accusations, I would like to present some evidence that may be relevant to this case." Tyler Sr. laughed dismissively. "What evidence?" "Everyone saw that violent girl attack my son." "Evidence about who really poses a danger to our school community," Mrs. Rodriguez replied, connecting a laptop to the projector. "Evidence about illegal activities that explain the violent behavior Tyler learned at home." Tyler Sr.'s smile began to falter. "What are you talking about?" Keisha stood up, handing the flash drive to Mrs. Rodriguez. "These are recordings and documents collected during a police investigation in Detroit, where my ex-stepfather Rico Martinez sold drugs to high-class clients." The first image appeared on the screen, Tyler Morrison Sr. in a dark garage, handing an envelope full of cash to a man with neck tattoos. The date showed 3 years ago, and the security footage was crystal clear. The auditorium exploded in shocked murmurs. Tyler Sr. turned completely pale, his hands shaking as he tried to process what he was seeing. This can't be real, he stammered, but his voice had lost all of its previous arrogance. Mrs. Rodriguez clicked on the next file. Bank documentation showing regular transfers of $200,000 from the Morrison Motors business account to offshore accounts, always on the same days as the documented deliveries. Jake stopped broadcasting live, his face reflecting horror and confusion. Reporters began asking questions loudly, and Director Peterson desperately tried to restore order. And here, Mrs. Rodriguez continued relentlessly, text messages between Tyler Morrison Sr. and Rico Martinez, discussing quantities, prices, and delivery locations. 15 months of complete correspondence. The messages appeared on the screen one by one. I need the merchandise for Saturday's party. My friends are asking if you have anything stronger. Rico, I can't be seen talking to you in public. Just use the normal deliveries. Tyler Sr. tried to stand up, but his legs gave out. I never. This is a setup. Setup. Keisha spoke for the first time, her voice cutting through the chaos like a knife. Mr. Morrison, do you remember a specific delivery on March 15, 2022? The one where you were so high you fell down the garage stairs. The silence in the auditorium was deafening. Tyler Sr. remembered that night perfectly. It had been one of the worst hangovers of his life. Mrs. Rodriguez clicked on the last file. It was a video recorded on a cell phone camera, showing Tyler Sr. staggering, visibly under the influence, while Rico counted stacks of cash in front of him. This recording, Keisha explained calmly, was made by Rico himself as life insurance. He recorded all his important clients because he knew he would need protection one day. Jake Morrison had stopped filming completely, his face a mask of shock and humiliation. The upper-class parents who had come to support the Morrisons began to get up and leave quietly, not wanting to be associated with the scandal. Now, Keisha said, turning to face Tyler Sr. directly, let's talk about domestic violence and where Tyler Jr. really learned that it's acceptable to hit people weaker than himself. Mrs. Rodriguez presented the final file, emergency medical reports on behalf of Tyler Jr., his mother, and even dealership employees, all documenting suspicious accidents over the years. Principal Peterson was clearly in shock. Mr. Morrison, we're going to need to adjourn this hearing and contact the appropriate authorities. Tyler Sr. finally found his voice, but it came out as a desperate whisper. How did you get all this? Keisha stared at him with the same frightening calm she had shown in the hallway. You forgot that people like me learn to survive by gathering information. Rico had been keeping those recordings for years, and when my mother cooperated with the police, she copied all the files for our own protection. You have no idea who you're messing with, Tyler Sr. tried one last desperate threat. Actually, Mr. Morrison, Mrs. Rodriguez smiled coldly, we know exactly who we're dealing with. A failed drug dealer who used the money from selling drugs to support a lifestyle his car dealership could never afford. The police arrived 20 minutes later. Tyler Sr. was arrested in the school auditorium on charges of conspiracy to traffic drugs and money laundering. Television cameras captured every second of his humiliating walk to the police car. Jake Morrison, who had spent days creating videos about justice being served, now watched his own world crumble live on social media. His followers, who had once supported his cause, now left comments mocking his family's spectacular downfall. As Tyler Sr. was led away in handcuffs, Keisha sat calmly in the front row, watching the complete destruction of the empire that had tried to destroy her. There was no malicious triumph in her eyes, only the quiet satisfaction of someone who had seen justice finally served. Mrs. Rodriguez approached her. How do you feel? Relieved, Keisha replied simply. Not because I got my revenge, but because I can finally stop carrying these secrets. In the crowd, Students who had once feared her now looked at her with respect and admiration. She hadn't just defended herself against a bully. She had exposed an entire network of corruption and violence that had infected her community. What no one in the auditorium could have predicted was how this dramatic revelation would transform not only Keisha's life, but the entire social dynamic of Roosevelt High and the city of Atlanta. Because when the smoke cleared and the charges were filed, it would be Keisha Williams, the girl everyone underestimated, who would emerge as the symbol of a change no one would ever forget. 6 months later, Tyler Morrison Sr. was serving an 8-year sentence for drug trafficking and money laundering. The dealership had gone bankrupt, the family mansion was auctioned off to pay debts, and Jake Morrison had to transfer to a public school across town, where he discovered what it was like to be the new kid with no privileges. Keisha, on the other hand, had become a legend at Roosevelt High, not just for breaking a bully's shoulder, but for exposing a web of corruption that no one knew existed. Mrs. Rodriguez had recommended her for a full scholarship to Harvard University, where she would study forensic criminology. You know what's ironic? Mrs. Rodriguez remarked as she helped Keisha fill out her college applications. Tyler Morrison tried to destroy you by using your humble origins as a weapon. Now it's those very origins that are taking you to the highest places. The student who once walked invisibly through the hallways now received respectful greetings from classmates and teachers. More importantly, 3 other victims of bullying had sought help after seeing how Keisha stood up to her oppressors with intelligence rather than just force. On the last day of school, Jake Morrison made a desperate attempt to approach her. "Keisha, I wanted to apologize," he stammered, clearly embarrassed. "I didn't know about my uncle, about the drugs." Keisha looked at him with her usual calm. "Jake, you knew exactly who your cousin was. The difference is that now everyone else knows too." As she walked down the hallway for the last time as a student at Roosevelt High, Keisha reflected on how that slap in the face had changed her life. Tyler Morrison had tried to humiliate her, but he ended up giving her the perfect opportunity to show that some people cannot be broken. The best revenge, she had learned, wasn't breaking the shoulder of someone who hurt you. The best revenge was building a life so extraordinary that your enemies spent the rest of their lives wondering how they had underestimated your strength. Tyler Jr. was still in physical therapy. Jake Morrison was flipping burgers at McDonald's. And Keisha Williams? She was on her way to Harvard, carrying with her the proof that true strength doesn't come from where you're born, but from how you choose to face those who try to bring you down. If this story of courage and determination has inspired you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories that prove that justice sometimes just needs a little help from us.